Yo. All right. Hey, what's going on? There we are. I knew the camera had to be working. I actually didn't test it before I got started, so I had no idea if it was actually gonna load properly. But hey, how's it going? It is Zerilath Eternal. Welcome. It is 7 o'clock, which is sometimes when I do a live stream. I have no plan because I'm just living my life. Welcome to the show, and we are going to jump into Chapter 13 of the Jewish War from Flavius Josephus. And we're still running through the world of Vespasia. The last chapter, we went through the harrowing tale of Josephus, the governor of Galilee or something like that. Anyway, he was quite a badass individual, all things considering. Considering the extent by which he held out everything else, like, he earned, like, all sorts of honors and stuff because of the long-drawn campaign that he created, so on and so forth. That was kind of wild to see. Anyway, tonight we're doing about 17 pages, so I've planned for 3 breaks, not 2. I thought it'd be appropriate to kick things off. That was To Obey a Tyrant, was the name of the band. Obsidian Soul. And then I got a few more heavies coming up for you. Alright, Chapter 13, Vespasian's Conquering Advance. On the 4th of Panemus, Vespasian marched his army to Ptolemy and thence to the coastal city of Caesarea, one of the largest in Judea, with a predominantly Greek population. Army and generals alike were received with loud applause and in the friendliest spirit, partly through goodwill towards the Romans, but still more through hatred of the vanquished, hatred which caused a howling mob to clamor for Josephus to be executed. But this demand, proceeding as it did from mass ignorance, Vespasian dismissed with contemptuous silence. 2 of the legions he settled for the winter at Caesarea, as he found the city convenient. The 15th he sent to Scythopolis to avoid burdening Caesarea with his whole army. That city, too, is as mild in winter as it is suffocatingly hot in summer, being situated on the plain and near the sea. Right, so very interesting. You got a massive Greek population in there, right? Do you see Greek populations in the Middle East anywhere today? The only thing you see that's even close to that is perhaps Jews of Europe that were in Greece or Greco-Jewish descent, and then they went back there, perhaps, by the time 1930s rolled around and they needed to get the F out of Dodge. But that's just an interesting context to note, right? It's like, it's not like, it's like there's actually been Europeans there before. Now, Greek are like Mediterranean, right? They're Europeans, but the Mediterranean peoples, they're the same, but they're different at the same time, right? Because the Mediterranean people, they seem to be like, although very Arctic people looking, unlike the other Arctic races, they're south enough to have spent more time in development. And I think, considering the way all things go, it's that these Mediterranean persons were effectively were part of the tropical races, I believe. because of how long this was going about, right? And then it's also just the question of Romulus, in particular, being the surviving of the two brothers. And although Romulus and Remus has this odd Cain and Abel relationship as a mythological archetype, I do believe that the Bach saga confers Romulus and Remus as Hyperborean princes that came down to Stark Kingdoms and such. So, meanwhile, those who in faction fights had been expelled from their towns joined with those who had survived the recent defeats, forming a sizable force, and succeeded to rebuild Joppa, recently devastated by Cestius, to serve as their base. Then, as they were cut off from the land which had been overrun, they decided to turn to the sea. But they built a large pirate fleet and began to raid the Syrian and Phoenician waters and the route to Egypt, making it impossible for anyone to sail those seas. So this kind of thing makes me think of, like, this isn't the Sea People's Federation, but I would believe, based on all the conspiracy history tracking that I've done, that we're talking about the legacy of and descendants of the Sea People Federation. Which then gets into things like Cult of Dagon and so on and so forth. But that's other Babylonian, Sumerian, type of descendants, right? Here, things would be much more pertained. I don't know. It's interesting, right? I don't want to say, because I haven't taken a huge microscope yet to what we do know about the Sea People's Federation. I know that there's a couple of the researchers out there that are that are better versed in it, but I cannot speak for their for what they are saying at all, or their integrity of character either, because I just don't know them. Vespasian, on hearing of this organization, sent horse and foot to Joppa. As the town was unguarded, this force entered it at night. The inhabitants were forewarned of the attack, but in their terror, they abandoned all hope of keeping out the Romans, and fleeing to their ships, spent the night out of range. Whoops. There is no There is no natural. It keeps. Hang on. That makes more sense. There is no natural harbor out at Joppa, which ends in an uneven beach, straight for most of its length, but curving gently at both ends. These are formed by lofty cliffs and reefs running out into the sea, where the marks of Andromeda's chair are still shown as proofs of the antiquity of the legend, beating full on the shore and dashing the waves high against the opposing rocks. The north wind makes the anchorage more dangerous than a landless sea. Here, the men from Joppa were riding at anchor when, just before daylight, they were struck by a violent gale, known to sailors in those parts as the Black North. Some of the ships it dashed against the others, and there others it drove on to the rocks. Many, in the face of the oncoming surge, forced their way into deeper waters, so great was the fear of this rocky shore and the enemy in possession of it. Yeah, once again, this kind of gives me more illusions of 300, because there's that scene in 300 where, there's like the big rainstorm. They're looking over the thing, and they can see all the Persian ships with all their many soldiers and whatnot, and in this storm, and they just sat there and they just watched as the ships got destroyed, and just like, they relished in it like it was their victory. The king ordered it to be witnessed because he knew it would rouse everyone's spirits, right? Because they'll see that, okay, these men are going to suffer like this before suffering under us, right? And that was the message conveyed. Okay, but even in the open sea, the mountainous waves overwhelmed them. There was no way of escape and no safety if they stayed. The power of the wind kept them from the sea, the power of the Romans from the land. There were agonizing shrieks as the vessels collided. When they broke up, the noise was deafening. Of the men on board, many were submerged by the waves and drowned. Many lost their lives, entangled in the wreckage, while some, thinking it less painful to die by the sword, cheated the sea by killing themselves. But most of them were cast up by the waves and dashed to pieces against the cliffs, so that a wide stretch of sea was strained while their blood and the beach was covered with corpses. For the Romans set upon those who were cast up on the shore and destroyed them. The number of bodies washed up was 4,200. The Romans captured the town without any fighting and demolished it. So the Romans could just straight up lose 4,200 men crossing the ocean and still be well off to fucking seize the city without a fight. Thus, in a short period, Joppa twice fell to the Romans to prevent the pirates from again settling their Vespasian thus in a short period, Joppa twice fell to the Romans. To prevent the pirate from again settling their Vespasian established a camp. That's very just badly written sentence. On the Acropolis, and left his cavalry in it along with a small infantry force. The latter were to stay where they were and guard the camp, while the cavalry plundered and surrounded the country and destroyed the villages and little towns in the neighborhood of Joppa. These orders were duly executed. The countryside was overrun and devastated day after day, till it was utterly desolate. When Jerusalem received news of the catastrophe at Jotapata, at first very few believed it. The disaster was so overwhelming and no eyewitness was available to confirm the report. No one had survived to relate what had happened. But a spontaneous rumor, for rumor delights in tragic news, announced the fall of the town. But by degrees, the truth trickled through, and everyone knew that there was no longer room for doubt. Truth, however, was supplemented by invention. For instance, it was stated that among those killed when the town fell was Josephus himself. This report caused extreme distress in Jerusalem, whereas the lamentation for each of the dead was confined to his own household and kindred. The mourning for the commander was nationwide. Some grieved for acquaintances, some for kinsmen, some for close friends, some for brothers, but the loss of Josephus distressed them all. For a whole month, the wailing never stopped in the city, and a great many hired professional mourners to lead their lamentations. But before long, the truth came to light, and what had really happened at Jotapata. When the people found out that the tragic fate of Josephus was an invention, and learned that he was alive and with the Romans, and that he was receiving from the officers treatment no prisoner could expect, they were as furious with him living as they had been kind about him when believed dead. You see, right, because he made this whole rationalized choice in the last chapter, right? He was just like, guys, we fight for life and yada, 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 and so if I die, it's all this foolishness and everything else, right? And this rousing speech didn't work, and he had to, you know, he had to kind of deal with all this stuff just to get himself turned in, and had some people get hurt, killed, that were, you know, on his side after he really wanted to go through with it, and he was making the argument from an altruistic point of view of not dying, right? Finding this reason within the greater, like, strategy. Like, he's trying to think of the future, right? He's trying to convey something, and it makes sense. It makes sense, right? And you would see a lot more of this behavior as we're leaving the age of Aries, going into the age of Pisces, when you think about it, right? Where you're trying these paths that aren't just, you're not just on the classical ages heroic path, right? You're not, like, necessarily making the final sacrifice. You're making other sacrifices, and then and then at this time, you're sacrificing respect and a lot of things for effectively a political move, and it can be interpreted as you weaseling out of responsibility, and so it's very interesting, right? So his actions, we'll see how this plays out. But that's just a little reminder of what was on last chapter. Some reviled him as a coward, some as a traitor. The city seethed with indignation, and nothing was too bad to say about him. The people were maddened by the blows they had suffered and inflamed by their disasters. A setback, which, with sensible people, as inducement to caution and to the avoiding of similar occurrences, with them was a spur to new calamities, and the end of one misery was invariably the beginning of another. So they were still more eager to get at the Romans in the hope that in damaging them they would requite Josephus. Such was excitement that held Jerusalem in its grip. Interesting. So the people would want, so they're probably going to try and threaten Rome and say, like, you need to give in to our demands, right? We want Josephus, right? And I don't think they want Josephus to set him free. I think they're pissed. Vespasian decided to acquaint himself with Agrippa's kingdom. He had been invited by the king himself, who was anxious to entertain the commander-in-chief and his army to the full extent of his privy purse, and at the same time to use them to settle the troubles within his borders. Starting therefore from Caesarea on the coast, he marched to Caesarea Philippi, where there he rested his troops for 3 weeks, while he himself attended state banquets and offered sacrifice to God in gratitude for his success. But when he was informed that Tiberius was in a rebellious state and Taricheia had revolted already, each being part of Agrippa's dominions, resolved as he was to crush the Jews everywhere, he decided that this was the moment to march against the rebels and to repay Agrippa's hospitality by subduing his cities for him. So he sent his son Titus to Caesarea to bring the forces still there to Scythopolis, the biggest city of Decapolis, not far from Tiberias, where he himself met him. Advancing at the head of 3 legions, he encamped 3.5 miles from Tiberias at a station well within view of the rebels, called Sanabris. Then he sent the decurion Valerian with a troop of horse to make proposals of people to the townsfolk and induce them to give pledges, for he had heard that the people were anxious for peace, but were being driven into war by a powerful faction. Valerian rode to Tiberias, and when he was near the wall, dismounted and made his men do the same, that they might not be thought to have come to skirmish. But before any words were exchanged, the leading rebels sallied out against him, weapons in hand, led by one Jeshua, son of Shaphat. See, there's a Jeshua just hanging out. Just like they were a dime a dozen. They still are. The supreme head of the terrorists, terrorist gang, Valerian thought it unsafe to join battle against the general's orders, even if victory was certain, and even dangerous indeed for a handful of men caught off their guard to engage a large force which had the initiative. Besides, he was disconcerted by the unexpected daring of the Jews, so he fled on foot, and 5 others similarly abandoned their horses, while Jeshua and his men brought back to the city as delighted as if they had captured them in battle, not by surprise. This so alarmed the elder citizens and acknowledged leaders that they fled to the Roman camp, and calling the king to their aid, threw themselves at Vespasian's feet, entreating him not to reject their appeal or impute the madness of a few to the entire city, but to spare the citizens who had been friendly to the Romans at all times, and punish only those responsible for the revolt, but for whom they themselves would have been only too glad to make their submission long ago. To these entreaties the general yielded, though the seizure of his horse made him angry with the whole city, for Agrippa's concern for his subjects was evident as the delegates made their submission in the name of all the citizens. Jeshua and his supporters decided that Tiberias was no longer a healthy place to stay in, and made a dash for Taricheae. Pretty sure Taricheae, I like the way that sounds the best. It's still not the easiest to pronounce, but I believe it's the best sounding of the most probably appropriate way of pronouncing that name. Next day, Vespasian sent forward a body of horse under Trajan as far as the ridge to find out whether the whole population was peace-minded. As soon as he felt sure that the citizens were unanimous in supporting their representatives, he marched his army to the city. The people opened their gates to him and met him with acclamations, calling him their savior and benefactor. So it's interesting to ask what all of that works as, right? So, like, how does one determine whether you're prepared if the city is hostile, right? Like, when you're long-winded like this, right? Because I believe we are still in the same military campaign. Like, Vespasian hasn't gone to Rome for a few months and then come back to the Middle East. It's like, he's here, he's working in the field. As the army was held up by the narrowness of the entrances, Vespasian ordered his men to break through the south wall, and thus made a wide passage for them. Plundering and violence, however, he ruled out in deference to the king, who induced him, also to spare the walls by guaranteeing the future loyalty of the inhabitants. Thus, after suffering grievously from its internal divisions, the city received a new lease of life. Then, marching to a spot between Tiberias and Taricheae, Vespasian pitched his camp, making it unusually strong in case he was held up there by prolonged fighting. For into Taricheae was pouring an endless stream of insurgents who relied on the strength of the town and the protection of the lake known locally as Gennesaret. The town was situated like Tiberias at the foot of the mountain, and except where it was washed by the lake, it had been fortified all round by Josephus, strongly but not as strongly as Tiberias, for there the rampart had been built in the early stages of the revolt when he had unlimited money and power, but Tertia had only enjoyed the remnants of his munificence. The occupants had a large number of boats ready on the lake to evacuate them if defeated on land, and equipped for a sea fight if necessary. While the Romans were fortifying their camp, Jeshua and his supporters, fearless in the face of the numbers and perfect discipline of the enemy, made a sortie, and at the first onset scattered the working party and tore down a short length of the wall. But when they saw the legionnaires forming up, they avoided all loss by a rapid withdrawal to their own lines. When the pursuing Romans forced them to take to their boats, they put out from shore, but kept the Romans within bowshot, then dropped anchor with their vessels side by side like infantrymen standing shoulder to shoulder and engaged in a sea fight with their enemy on land. Meantime, Vespasian, learning that the great bulk of them were formed up on the plain before the town, sent his son with 600 picked troopers. He, finding himself seriously outnumbered, sent a request to his father for reinforcements. In the meantime, seeing that while most of his troopers were eager to fight without waiting for help to arrive, some few could not hide their consternation at the Jews' advantage in numbers. He took his stand where all could hear him and began. Romans, I cannot begin better than by reminding you of the name you bear, that you may realize how different we are from the men we are going to fight. From our hands, nothing in the wide world has hitherto escaped. The Jews, we must admit, have not yet shown any sign of lying down under defeat. It would be a shocking thing if, when they stand unbowed in the midst of disaster, we should flag in the midst of success. The enthusiasm you outwardly display, I am delighted to see, but I fear the enemy's advantage in numbers may produce in a few of you a secret fear. If they should again ponder the difference between their opponents and themselves, and the fact that the Jews, though extremely bold and contemptuous of death, have neither discipline nor experience of war, and are nothing but a rabble, not fit to be called an army. Of our own experience and discipline, nothing need be said, but our object in being the one people to undergo military training in peacetime is that in war we may not have to compare our numbers with our opponents. What should we gain by being constantly on active service if we needed equal numbers to oppose a mob of raw recruits? So, this gets into, the fact that, it's just like, okay, there's a lot of them, but we're regulars that are well prepared. These guys are just an armed and last minute organized mob, right? And we have seen the way things go down outside of the Romans in these lands, right? And these early chapters showed you the madness right there, right? So we're going to take a break right here because this is we're down through to 5 pages thus far. And now I'm going to throw some more Fallujah at you. This is called Starlit Path. right, there we go. Good stuff. So, welcome back to the show. We are here with this chapter, and we're going to keep rocking and rolling. We're on page 218. Remember again that you are fighting in full armor again. Men who have none, that you are horse and they are foot, that you have leaders and they are leaderless. These advantages make you, in effect, far more numerous than you are, while the enemy's disadvantages make their numbers count for very little. Wars are won not by the size of an army, however skillful, but by courage, however tiny, and the forces available. Small forces can be quickly deployed and can readily support each other, while swollen armies do themselves more damage than the enemy can do. The Jews are inspired by reckless audacity and desperation, emotions that invigorate while things go well, but are extinguished by the smallest setback. Yes, he's talking about fundamental immaturity, right? I'll put it to you this way. You go back to the Floyd riots, right? 2020 and the Floyd riots was kind of like really the last breath of the properly supported and organized radical left mission of the last, 12 years, right? Where we're talking about stuff that was set into motion for and with the Obama administration and that reinvention of the Democrat Party, which also is going to be going through serious trials as various things continue to come to light, because I don't think that they're going to be able to avoid following the leads on the connections to Barack Obama with Puff Daddy, right? And this example is kind of like an apropos per se, right? Like, because the people involved here are, it's the same mess of, like, because you had the full-throated message of defund the police, right? Now, you know me. I believe that we should strive towards a no rulers, no slaves, rule of law society that has a few other features in there too, as fail-safes for both freedom that do not sacrifice common sense ideas that give us security without needing a, quote, security state, right? But the profane, unfortunately, need it, because we're the first generation of people that are really fucking trying to do this a certain way, especially with how strongly we're going to be talking about the non-aggression principle, which also means we can't have the passive-aggressive principle to replace it. Just be honest in your aggression. So here's my point. You saw all of that. These people are like fucking weekend warriors. And it's just like, these guys are the advocates for being gunless, don't even have they have no martial prowess, and they want to be a gunless society, and they want to show the superiority of their gunless society by trying to beat the people with guns, which only works because the cops are told not to do their job. They're defunded, and they're on stand-down orders. And then you've got certain aspects of things like remember when the National Guard started fucking dancing with these people? So anyway, but yeah, and the only reason why it came to an end is that they ordered regular order to come back in, right? And so we turned the law back on sometime after, sometime like, I don't know, it was like sometime just before the election. I don't know. Those riots, they went on well after the summer, right? Like, there were flames that kept going in Seattle for fucking forever, right? I think I didn't hear about any of that stuff coming to a stop until damn near 2021. Maybe even early 2021. Right? Just because of a couple of Supreme Courts with conservative favoring judges, right? So anyway, my point is if you can picture that and remember it in your mind in comparison, right? That's kind of the bit, right? It's the same thing happened on Occupy Wall Street. It's the same thing. Occupy Wall Street was like the test run for the summer of Floyd. Occupy Wall Street was allowed to happen. Granted, you were supposed to allow it to happen, but at the same time, it eventually ran out of purpose. It was just there to perpetuate a signal without doing anything other than let's go disrupt and put our message here while in disruption, so on and so forth, right? The George Floyd marches, this was the dark reverse of that, because probably a lot of people that remembered how things went down and really were bitter about how things went down. There were some people on the right that were hopeful just because they saw kids, quote, waking up, right? I was hopeful, being like almost a millennial, not a millennial, but close to the millennials in age group, that it didn't not make sense for me to be there and try, right? Anyway, we are inspired by disciplined courage and fortitude, which in prosperity reaches its greatest heights, and in adversity endures to the end. And you will be fighting for a greater prize than the Jews, for though they face the dangers of war to defend the liberty of their country, what greater prize could you win than glory and the assurance that after mastering the whole world, we do not acknowledge the Jews as rivals? The whole world. Anyway, observe, too, that there is no fear of our suffering any irrevocable disaster. Ample reinforcements are at hand, but we can snatch the victory ourselves, and we must not wait for the men my father is sending to support us. If no one shares it, our triumph will be the greater. So he's straight up like, yeah, I know I got reinforcements coming, but that's like, fuck that, you guys can handle this. You guys totally can handle this. Right? They'll be there, I guess, in case you fail, but don't you guys want this? And, and naturally, that also makes the fight a little bit better, because at worst, they can pace themselves until people show up. Right? And so that gives them psychologically another good reason to make this happen. My own feeling is that at this moment my father is on trial, so am I, and so are you. Does he deserve his past triumphs? Do I deserve to be his son? Do you and you to be my soldiers? With him, victory is a habit. I could not bear to return to him defeated. Would you not be ashamed if your commander led the way into danger and you failed to follow? I shall lead the way. You may be sure and shall be the first to charge the enemy. So don't you fail me or doubt for a moment that with God at my side, my efforts are bound to success. I tell you plainly in advance that in fighting here outside the walls, we shall win a far-reaching triumph. As Titus delivered his address, a sudden wave of enthusiasm swept the men off their feet, and when Trajan arrived before the battle with 400 horse, they were vexed that the victory would bring them less credit through being shared. Vespasian also sent Antonius Silo with 2,000 bowmen, who were to seize the hill opposite the town and pin down the defenders on the wall. These orders were carried out, and every attempt to bring help from within was frustrated. Meanwhile, Titus galloped to the front and charged the enemy with loud hurrahs. The rest followed, extending their line across the plain to the length of the enemy front, and so giving the impression of much greater numbers than they possessed. The Jews, though taken aback by their discipline and dash, for a time stood up to the onslaught, but pierced by lances and overborne by the momentum of horses and men, they were trampled underfoot, and death reigned everywhere. The survivors scattered and fled to the town, every man as fast as he could run. Titus, hard on their heels, cut down the stragglers, drove through tight masses, rode past other groups and charged them from the front, pulverized many by leaping among them as they got in each other's way, headed them off as they fled towards the walls, and turned them back towards the plain until by weight of numbers they forced their way through and sought safety in the town. Once within the walls, they were again involved in party strife. The residents clung to their possessions in their town and had been opposed to the war from the first. Now, after the defeat, they were still more opposed to it. But the newcomers, who were very numerous, insisted all the more. Both sides lost their tempers, and the shouting and uproar made it evident that they would soon be at each other's throats. Hearing the commotion, Titus, who was not far from the wall, exclaimed, "Now is your chance, men. Why hesitate? When the Jews are ours for the taking, seize your opportunity. Do you not hear the row? The men who have slipped through our fingers are fighting each other. The town is ours if we make haste, but we will have to work hard and fight hard too. Great prizes cannot be won without taking risks. We must not wait for the enemy to make up their quarrel. Necessity will reconcile them soon enough, and we must not wait for reinforcements. Either we have beaten a whole army with a handful of men, and now we will capture the town by ourselves." With these words, he leapt into the saddle and led the way to the lake. Riding through the water, he entered the town at the head of his men. His audacity filled the defenders with terror, and not a man stayed to offer the least resistance. Abandoning their posts, Jeshua and his supporters fled across country, while the rest rushed down to the lake, where they ran into the enemy, advancing to meet them. Some were killed as they got into their boats, others as they tried to swim to those who had put out before. In the town, the streets ran with blood, the same fate befalling newcomers who had not escaped in time and now tried to resist, and the residents who offered no resistance at all, as in the hope of their submission being accepted in the knowledge that they had opposed the war they refused to fight. At last, Titus, having disposed of the culprits, took pity on the residents and put an end to the slaughter. Those who had taken refuge on the lake, when they saw that the town had fallen, put out as far from the enemy as they could. Titus sent a dispatch rider to give his father the good news of what had happened. Vespasian was naturally delighted at his son's prowess and at the resounding victory. Thinking that a very important chapter of the war had been brought to a close, going at once to the scene, he ordered the town to be encircled by guards. If anyone slipped out, he must be killed. The next day, he went down to the lake and ordered rafts to be put together for the pursuit of the fugitives. These were soon ready, as there was abundance of wood and no lack of carpenters. Lake Gennesareth takes its name from the region adjoining it. Though it measures 16 miles by 4.5, its water is most delicious. And just remember, miles would not have been measured as a mile. So, for it is clearer than cloudy marsh water and quite pure, as on every side it ends in a sandy beach. When drawn, it is pleasantly warm, more agreeable than river or spring water, but always cooler than one would expect from a lake of that size. It is as cold as snow when exposed to the air, a regular practice of the local people on summer nights. The species of fish that live in the lake differ in taste and appearance from those found elsewhere. Right through the middle flows the Jordan. Jordan is believed to rise at Penium. Actually, it flows there out of sight underground from the bowl, or the bowl. Anyone going up into Trachonitis will find this pool 14 miles from Caesarea. Caesarea Philippi is the note he gives here. Not very far to the right of the road, it is very aptly called the bowl. Okay, so it is bowl, because of its shape. Being as round as a wheel, the water always remains level with its brim, neither sinking nor running over. For a long time it was not known that the Jordan rose there, but the truth was established by the tetrarch of Trachonitis, Philip, who threw chaff into the bowl and found it came to the surface at Penium, which earlier generations had believed to be the source of the river. Penium, naturally beautiful, has been further embellished by royal bounty, being adorned at Agrippa's expense. The visible course of the Jordan begins at the cavern, cuts through the still, marshy swamps of Lake Semiconitis. Lake Hula, as it is also known, which covers another 14, whatever that is, miles, and after passing the city of Julius, goes straight through the middle lake of Gennesareth, then, after a long journey through the desert country, finishes up in the Dead Sea. Alongside Lake Gennesareth is a stretch of country with the same name, wonderful in its characteristics and in its beauty. Thanks to the rich soil, there is not a plant that does not flourish there, and the inhabitants grow everything. The air is so temperate that it suits the most diverse species. Walnuts, most winter-loving of trees, flourish in abundance, as do palms. Excuse me. As do palms. Sorry, I lost my place. Suits the most diverse species, walnuts, Okay, one might deem nature's crowning achievement. No. Figs, olives, flourish in abundance, so do palms. Sorry, which thrive on heat, side by side with figs and olives, for which a milder air is indicated. One might deem it nature's crowning achievement to force together into one spot natural enemies and to bring the seasons into healthy rivalry, each, as it were, laying claim to the region, for not only does it produce the most surprisingly diverse fruits, it maintains a continuous supply. Those royal fruits, the grape and the fig, it furnishes for 10 months on end, the rest ripening on the trees all year round. For apart from the temperate atmosphere, it is watered by a spring with great fertilizing power, known locally as Capernaum. Some have thought this an offshoot of the Nile, as it breeds a fish very like the perch caught in the Lake of Alexandria. The length of the region measured along the shore of the lake that bears the same name is 3.5 miles and a width of 2.5 miles. Such is the character of the locality. Preparations completed, he put on board as much of his force as he thought adequate to deal with, their opponents. Just counting my pages here. In the boat. And the pursuit began. Thus encircled, the Jews could neither escape to land where the enemy were in full possession, nor fight it out on the water with any hope of success. Their boats were small and built for piracy, and were weak in comparison. With the rafts and the men on board, each one were so few that they dared not come to grips with the Romans, who attacked them in mass formation. However, they circled round the rafts and sometimes even approached, pelting the Romans with stones at long range, then scraping past and attacking them at close quarters. Now, pelting them with stones, was that like worthy pelting, or was it like, y'all feel something? Like, was it just like, hey, that's annoying? Or was it like man down, man down? Like, because if it's not man down, it's like, it's just provocation. In either case, they got the worst of it. Their shower of stones merely rattled on the Roman armor, while they themselves were targets for Roman arrows, and when they ventured to approach, they had no time to do anything before disaster overtook them, and they went down, boats and all. Some tried to break through, but the Romans were near enough to transfix many of them with their lances, killing others by leaping into the boats, sword in hand. So, once again, this is more amateur hour. It's the same kind of deadly follies that we were used to in the first couple of chapters. Some, as the rafts closed in, were caught in the middle and destroyed along with their craft. If any of those who had been plunged into the water came to the surface, they were dispatched with an arrow or caught by a raft. If in their extremity they attempted to climb on board, their heads or hands were severed by the Romans. Vast numbers of Jews perished in countless ways on every side, until the fleeing remnants were driven to the shore, their craft completely surrounded. As they poured out of them, many were struck down while still in the water. Many who had leapt clear were destroyed by the Romans on the beach. By the way, it's entirely possible, that I'm sure the way the history pans out, because we all know that these campaigns were real, right? Likely these people that flee, if Rome has a good grab on all of these places, that means that these particular Jews don't have a home anymore. They can't stand to be here, right? They don't care for the way of life that the Romans would have set for their lands. And so they are driven out, and they probably would have gone to Europe. A fearful sight met the eyes. Well, no, they wouldn't have, they would have probably gone actually to to more of the Turkic area. Honestly, they probably would have been involved with the Ottomans, or something to that effect, because yeah, like if if they were to go north, they'd have to go, they'd be cutting through more of Rome. So I think that the Jews probably didn't get into Europe until Rome fell. Well, no, these, like I said, we're talking about, there are different kind of Jews here, right? You've got the pro-Roman Jews, the anti-Roman Jews, and that's for the most part what this book is about, right? And so you would have anti-Roman Jews that probably would have gone elsewhere. They became gypsies. Okay, maybe that makes sense. Was Romania a part of the Romania was part of the Eastern Empire, right? You see, I'm not super well versed on the history of Jewish attitudes in the world, because I'm not worried about Jewish attitudes, because none of it is based on proper arguments of accountability, personal responsibility, tracking conspiracies, and placing names on assailants of those who would undermine persons, and so on and so forth, right? You know, substantive things that matter, as opposed towards my general attitudes because I don't like it because you're rat-faced, right? It's this whole fucking thing with Mr. Rat. But anyway, a fearful sight met the eyes, the entire lake stained with blood and crammed with corpses, for there was not a single survivor. During the days that followed, a horrible stench hung over the region. The beaches were thick with wrecks and swollen bodies, which, hot and steaming in the sun, made the air so foul that the calamity not only horrified the Jews, but revolted even those who had brought it about. Such was the outcome of this naval engagement. The dead, including those who earlier perished in the town, totaled 6,700. 6,700 fools dying in a kill box. After the battle, Vespasian held a court-martial in Tarichaea, making a distinction between the residents and the newcomers whom he considered responsible for the war. Okay, interesting. So here we see some form of justice being established, and he's not being some Mr. Cruel, everybody's guilty across the board. So let's take a listen here. He put the question to his staff whether these two should be spared. The verdict was that it would be against the public interest to set them free. If released, they would not keep the peace, being stateless refugees in a position to induce those who sheltered them to take up arms. Vespasian decided that they did not deserve to be spared, and that if they were released, they would injure those who had set them free. But he was not sure of the right way to get rid of them. If he killed them, then and there he suspected that he would antagonize the residents, who would be outraged by the execution of so many suppliants in their midst, and he could not think of letting them go under safe conduct and then setting upon them. However, his advisors got their way by arguing that Jews had no rights whatever, and that expediency must be preferred to conventional morality whenever the two were in conflict. Okay, so that's interesting about the rights. So is he saying that they so on what level of, quote, rights are we talking about, right? Because, you know, having rights also doesn't mean that you're free. You could have like the right to be a slave, right? Like you can make those things into rights. It just means that you're permitted to do the thing. It's ritual, right? Are you permitted to do your ritual? Are you capable of doing your ritual? Who can stop you, right? Or do you get to do your rights, or do you have to live by someone else's rights? Or is he talking about what would theoretically be special privileges, saying that it should be special for the Jews, because this is a whole Jewish situation and not just ordinary crime, right? These particularities, which it's not like that's something new to the effing empire. The empire has protocols already for conquered persons. So anyway, so he gave the doomed men a guarantee of safety in ambiguous terms, permitting them to leave only by the road that led to Tiberias. Instantly falling into the trap and suspecting nothing, they loaded themselves with their possessions quite openly and set out along the permitted route. And from here, we're going to take the next break. Let me double check here where we're at. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. Yes, that's correct. Okay. Got 7 pages left from this spot. So for our next song, I've went with something a little. I went for something a little bit more melodic, sorta. This is Ignia with Alga.
dare you, godless bastards, step on my land? How dare you touch my daughters and sons? This will be your last test unless you kill. Take the feather eagle into your hands and run!
Excellent. So that one's a little bit tamer than what you're usually hearing from me lately. I've been pretty fucking brutal lately. I've been sitting there being like, dude, I don't want to play any folkish music. Nah. But come on, do you want to play something that's more like, from the 80s maybe? Like some 80s metal, something less brutal, but like classic and awesome. I'm just like, not today. Right? It's kind of like my internal dialogue while I'm sitting there browsing YouTube. It's almost like I'm either looking for nostalgia of a song that doesn't sound nostalgic, or I'm looking for the novelty of something new, as opposed to going to the same fucking 50 songs that I've been listening to for fucking like 20 years, right? Because, sometimes I do want to just go and hit what I've hit a million times before, right? I have certain bands that are staples that, like, I've just played them too much. Anyway, I mean, especially with my record collection now, because I'll want to go to those to get my vibe check in with them. So anyway, meanwhile, the Romans lined the road all the way to Tiberias so that no one could leave it and shut them up in the city. Vespasian followed and herded them all into the stadium. The aged and useless, 1,200 of them were disposed of by his orders. From the young men, he picked out the 6,000 strongest and sent them to Nero at the Isthmus. Oops. New Wave tried to destroy the metal, but metal had its way. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Man, I was very amused by Tenacious D for a long time. And still fun, I suppose. But man, Jack Black is among the kind of fucking characters that you just sit there and you're just like, it's like we needed all sorts of people to really use their minds and apply it to their voices. And to have some integrity and apply it to that voice, to speak up for things in a way that wasn't just complete fucking rhetoric, empty rhetoric, right? Because Tenacious D was this fun thing, was this metal thing, but he's more of a Hollywood thing, right? Tenacious D was something that he did on the side, because movies was like his primary thing, right? This is why, like, And this is just, you know, everybody who thought all of his stuff was funny, they're all dealing with a much more serious world now, and because he didn't get more serious, even with his comedy, it soured everything about him because it made him kind of two-dimensional, right? It's just like, so that's it. You're just a man-child. There's nothing else to you behind your very successful act, right? And this is just indicative of how the corporate body that runs things on behalf of the social engineers propagate people, right? You know, the only thing remarkable about the Diddy trial is that the Diddy trial is actually happening. That's the only thing remarkable about it, is that it's the first time we've actually taken it to trial. This has been going on forever, open secret, and it's no longer an open secret. Now, the question is this designed to completely destroy that infrastructure? And I think the reason why the world is where it is right now is not just because all of these celebrities are in trouble, but their entire system in this manner that they did things is destroyed. Yeah, Jack played at Hollywood. You know, half the reason why Jack is a success is because they enjoy the fact that he is happy being fat and clumsy, right? Because they made a very distinct decision in perhaps the late 80s, early 90s, you know, that the American Family sitcom was going to have the not in top shape to varying degrees of obesity, working class, average intelligence father. And perhaps it was going to be the traditional housewife like you get with like The Simpsons or Family Guy, or it's something more working class, or something unconventional, Peggy Bundy from Married with Children. And I think psychically they named those characters the Bundys because I had some sort of tertiary consciousness as a young child that there was this thing about a scary man who was convicted of murder named Bundy, like Ted Bundy, right? And it was around the time that name was swimming in my consciousness that also it was just like Married with Children with the Bundy family, right? And so, you know, your small mind is just like it only knows so much of the world. And, you know, it's little things like that. And then later on you become a conspiracy theorist, and then you start kind of reverse engineering things just because you're looking at coincidences and looking for synchronicities. And then eventually you're taking those synchronicities and you're realizing maybe there's a method to everything going on here, right? You know, that's part and parcel of a lot of the conversation going on at the Occult Rejects that I appreciate as we've deconstructed these things. Okay, so let me scroll back up a pinch. Let me look at the one for Cow at Dan. Okay, so where's the one? There it is, the Isthmus. So the rest of the people, to the number of 30,400, he auctioned, except those he presented to Agrippa. The men who came from his kingdom, Vespasian allowed him to deal with as he pleased, and the king put them to under the hammer. Is that right? Under the hammer. Okay. He put them too under the hammer. The rest of the mob came from Trachonitis, Gaulonitis, Hippos, and Gadarene district, and was largely composed of rebels and fugitives whose unsavory reputation in peacetime made war seem to them attractive. Disaster overtook them on the 8th of Gorpaios. After the fall of Jotapata, some of the Galileans had remained in revolt against Rome, but when Tarichaea was overwhelmed, they surrendered, and the Romans took over all the fortress and towns except Gischala and the garrison of Mount Tabor. These were supported by Gamala, a town opposite Tarichaea on the opposite side of the lake. This town was in the territory assigned to Agrippa, as were Sogain and Seleucia, Gamala and Sogain. Both belonged to Gaulonitis, Sogain being part of the Upper Gaulan, as it is called, and Gamala of the Lower. Seleucia was near Lake Semiconitis. This lake is 3.5 miles wide and 7 long. Its marshes stretch as far as Daphne, a pleasant spot in many ways, with springs that feed the little Jordan under the temple of the Golden Cow, which is at Dan, and send it pouring into the Jordan proper. Sogain and Seleucia had been persuaded at the beginning of the revolt to submit to Agrippa, but Gamala had refused to surrender, relying on its accessibility even more than Jotapata had done. Sloping down from a towering peak is a spur like a long, shaggy neck, behind which rides a symmetrical hump so that the outline resembles that of a camel, hence the name, the exact form of the word being obscured by the local pronunciation. On the face and both sides it is cut off by impassable ravines. Near the tail it is rather more accessible, where it is detached from the hill, but here too, by digging a trench cross, the inhabitants made access very difficult. Built against the almost vertical flank, the houses were piled on top of one another, and the town seemed to be hung in air and on the point of tumbling on top of itself from its very steepness. It faced south, and its southern crest, which rose to an immense height, served as citadel, resting an unwalled precipice that went straight down into the deepest ravine. There was a spring inside the wall at the far side of the crown. Nature having thus made the town well nigh impregnable, Josephus had walled it around and given it the additional protection of trenches and underground passages. Thanks to the natural strength of the position, its occupants were more confident than the Jotapatans had been. But they had much fewer fighting men, being so sure of their defenses that they would not admit more, for the town was crowded with refugees because of the protection it offered, as proved by the fact that the forces previously sent to Agrippa to besiege it had made no headway after 7 months. Vespasian set out from Amathus, i.e. warm baths. The town contains a spring of warm water with medicinal qualities, where he had been encamped before Tiberius and marched to Gamala. Unable to put an unbroken ring of men around the town because of its situation, he posted sentries wherever he could and occupied the hill that looked over it. When the legions had fortified their camps in the usual way on its slopes, he began to construct platforms at the tail end in the eastern part of the ridge, where rose the highest of the towers. The construction was done by the 15th Legion. The 5th worked opposite the middle of the town, and the filling in of the trenches and ravines was undertaken by the 10th. At this juncture, King Agrippa approached the wall and was trying to discuss terms of surrender with the defender when one of the slingers he hit him on the right elbow with a stone. He was immediately surrounded by his own men, but the determination of the Romans to press the siege was redoubled both by indignation on the king's account and by anxiety for their own safety. For men who displaced such savagery towards one of their own race, who advised them in their own interests, would stick at no brutality in treating foreigners and enemies. With so many skilled hands, the platforms were soon finished and the engines brought up. Charles and Joseph, I think that's meant to be Charles. I don't know where Charles can Cheris. You see what I mean? Like that word, that name's not popped up before, so I have no idea what he's referring to. Cheris and Joseph, the most effective leaders in town, lined up their armed forces, though they had already lost heart because they had little hope of withstanding the siege for long. Being short of water and other necessities, however, their leader laughed at their fears and led them out onto the wall. For a time they beat back those who were bringing up the engines, but becoming the target for the catapults and stone throwers, they withdrew into the town. Then the Romans brought up the rams at 3 points, and battering their way through the wall, poured in through the breaches with a great blare of trumpets and din of weapons, and shouting themselves, horse flung themselves upon the defenders of the town. They, for a time, stood firm against the first wave of attackers, and offering strenuous resistance, prevented the Romans from advancing further. But, under heavy pressure from all directions, they withdrew to the upper parts of the town, and as the enemy pursued them, they swung round and counterattacked vigorously. Swept down the slope and jammed inextricably in the narrow alleys, the Romans suffered fearful casualties. I think that's fearful. Unable either to resist those above them or to force their way through the advancing mass of their companions, they climbed onto the roofs of the houses, where they rested against the slopes. Crowded with men and unequal to the weight, these quickly collapsed. As one fell, it knocked down many of those underneath, and so on to the bottom. The effect on the Romans was devastating. Completely at a loss. Even when they saw the roofs falling in, they jumped onto them. Many were buried under the debris. Many, while trying to escape, found one limb or another pinned down. Still more were choked by the dust. Seeing in this the hand of God, and indifferent to their own losses, the men of Gamala pressed their attack, driving the enemy on to the roofs as they stumbled in the steep, narrow ways, and with a rain of weapons from above, dispatching those who fell. Okay, so they were able to get this crazy upper hand because they bothered to pursue them into buildings that couldn't support the weight, and then they collapsed under all the weight of people in them, effectively. That's a pretty clever strategy. The debris furnished them with any number of great stones, and the bodies of the enemies with cold steel. They wrenched the swords from the fallen and used them to finish off those who were slow to die. Many of the houses were actually flung themselves to their death. Not even those who fled found it easy to get away, for unacquainted with the roads and choked with the dust, they could not even recognize their friends, but in utter confusion attacked each other. At last, after long search, they found the outlets and escaped from town. Vespasian, keeping it as close as he could to his struggling soldiers, and deeply moved by the sight of the town falling in ruins about his army, had forgotten his own safety, and without realizing it, had gradually reached the highest level of the town, where he found himself in the utmost peril and almost alone. Not even his son Titus was with him at this time, having just been sent to Mucianus in Syria. flight seemed both dangerous and disgraceful. So, wow, so the Emperor finds himself in a tough spot. Because if he's not fucking prepped, he's going to get fucked. So remembering his lifetime of struggle and his reputation for prowess, he became like one inspired, made his men link their shields to cover their armed bodies, stemmed the wave of attackers that swept down from above, and heedless of the swarms of men and the hail of missiles, stood firm, until overawed by his superhuman courage, the enemy slackened their attacks. Relieved of their pressure, he withdrew step by step. So that's very interesting. So this guy had the ability to have so much intimidating presence in some way, shape, or form with his ability. That somehow this discouraged people. I find that's very interesting, right? So this kind of, this could be a technique, like, if these emperors that become emperors have certain bestowments on them. Perhaps he has good luck charms that give magical powers. Perhaps he's got a daemon on his side, so on and so forth. But anyway, not turning his back till he was outside the walls, Roman losses in this battle were very heavy. One of the fallen was the Decurion Albutius, a man who not only in the action in which he fell, but in many earlier battles had shown heroic courage and inflicted very heavy casualties on the Jews. A centurion named Gallus, cut off with 10 soldiers in the melee, crept into somebody's house. Like the others, he was a Syrian, and he overheard the occupants discussing over supper how they would deal with the Romans and look after themselves. In the night he emerged from hiding, cut all their throats, and with his men got back safely to the Roman lines. Roman morale had suffered severely. Defeat was unfamiliar. Disaster on this scale unprecedented, and the soldiers burned with shame. Think they had left their commander to his fate. But Vespasian consoled them, suppressing any allusions to himself to avoid the least. Hold on a second. To the least. Shoot. How did I lose this? Restored the morale of his army. Oh, no. I think I was supposed to be up here. So defeat was unfamiliar. Yeah, okay, I missed it. To avoid the least semblance of reproof. What might happen to anyone you must face, he said, like men. Hold on a second. Remember, it is in the nature of war that bloodless victories do not happen. Fickle-footed fortune spares no one. You have killed thousands and thousands of Jews, and her ladyship has only exacted a token payment. If it is vulgar to crow over victory, it is just as cowardly to whine under defeat. You never know how long either will last. A first-class soldier never lets success go to his head. That is why failure never gets him down. As for recent events, they were not due to any slackness of ours or to the Jewish prowess. Their gain and our loss both came from the difficulty of the ground. With that in mind, you might be blamed for your reckless impetuosity. When the enemy retired to the higher ground, you should have restrained yourselves and not run your heads into danger that hung over you. As you were masters of the lower town, you should have gradually enticed the enemy down to where you could meet them safely on firm ground. Okay, so basically Vespasian is basically saying if I was in command, I would not have I would have ordered you to hold your ground, right? Instead, in your headlong dash for victory, you forgot all about safety. Such recklessness in war, such crazy impetuosity is foreign to us Romans, who win all our victories by efficiency and discipline. Sorry? It is the vice of backwards races and the chief cause of Jewish defeats. See that? So this is just talking about, like, it's the difference, right? It's the difference between, because, you know, like, pagans with warrior cultures, their people are not in a state such as this. Okay, then it is up to us to rely once more on our own superiority and to see red rather than be down in the mouth about an unlucky reverse. So let me see here. Wait a minute. 27. Was this where I was cutting off for the last 2 pages? You know what? This is a good spot to do it anyway. That'll give me 3 pages. So it's a page short, but it gives me 3 pages on the other end. We're going to take the other break now. So real quick, with just so I don't leave it on that note that I of my own running commentary. Right? This is looking at who and what these people are then, right? And you know, obviously the game board is very different now, and this book is supposed to be a big chapter in the changing of that game board, right? But it's still to stand to reason that it's understood that the main reason why there is a Jewish conspiracy is kind of based on all this stuff, right? The losers of this to Rome wanted to put their shit in the world, and so they started manipulating people through Christendom, and from what I understand, also through Islamdom over time. So anyway, we're going to run with one more song. So also changing it up a tiny bit, I decided to go with Perturbator, which is a industrial band. This is called The Art of War. one of those instrumental things. It's just, it's for heavy dancing. That's what that shit's for. That's good stuff. That's God's place. I'd probably have a goth girlfriend by now if I listened to more music like that and softer. But anyway, let's see here. Three pages left to go, and thanks Tim Timony for being here. I noticed you in the chat room and all that. You mentioned the grapes of Eschol, and I acknowledge your whole thing about the gypsies in Romania, the new wave. That was a Tenacious D quote and all that shit. King Queens, and hey, what's up, Pasta Sploos here. Cool. All right, so the best encouragement each of you will find is his own right arm. That is, how you can avenge the killed and punish the killers. For my own, For my own part, I shall try in this and every battle to be first to get at the enemy and the last to leave the field. With this address, Vespasian restored the morale of his army. Meanwhile, the people of Gamala were, for the moment, cheered by their success. So unexpected and so overwhelming, but later, when they realized that they had robbed themselves of any hope of coming to terms and knew in their hearts that they could not escape, already they were short of supplies. They became terribly despondent, and their courage failed them. However, they did what they could to make themselves safe. The bolder spirits guarded the gaps in the wall. The rest lined the battlements still standing. By the way, a thing about empire with Europe is that Rome is the only, empire that Europe knew until Christian times. Then we had, post-pagan empires that would pop up. And even then, it wasn't very immediate, right? I don't think was anything considered an empire. People say what they're going to say about Charlemagne, but I'm pretty sure Charlemagne was just a big kingdom, right? Can't remember in this particular moment because I don't have that period of history in my hard drive at the moment. It's up there somewhere, but it's not in my random access memory. But anyway, but when the Romans raised the platform higher and tried a new assault, most of them began to run out of town, down almost impassable ravines where no piquets had been posted, piquets had been posted, or pisquets. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce that. Or through the underground passages. The few who remained from fear of being captured were starving, for every corner had been scraped bare to supply the fighting men. While in spite of these privations, Gamala still held out. Vespasian diverted some of his strength to deal with the garrison of Mount Tabor, midway between Scythopolis and the Great Plain. This mountain is no less than 20,000 feet high, with the northern face almost unclimbable. The top is a plateau 3 miles long with a wall right around. Josephus had multiplied the length by 5 and the height by 10. So there's the wall, and then there's an understanding that the wall was expanded. So, this huge rampart Josephus had built in 40 days, drawing the material from below and even his water, as the occupants had nothing but rain. On this plateau, vast numbers had gathered, so Vespasian dispatched 600 horsemen under Placidas. He, finding the ascent impossible, called on the rank and file to make peace, offering to intercede for them and obtain terms. They came down intending to meet guile with guile. Placidas had wooed them with honeyed words in order to capture them in the plain. They came down in apparent compliance, intending to attack him off his guard. However, Placidas won the battle of wits, for when the Jews began the fight, he pretended to flee, drew his pursuers far into the plain, turned his horsemen about, and routed the enemy, killing vast numbers of them and cutting off the rest so that they could not return. These gave up Tabor for lost, and fled to Jerusalem, the natives there safely being guaranteed and their water having failed, handed themselves and the mountain over to Placidas. And remember, this is like, we're not in the Crusades. This isn't even like a holy war, right? This is, this is, and yet we'll be fighting over this region again in the Middle Ages. It's ridiculous. So at Gamala, the more venturesome were slipping away unnoticed, while the combatants sustained the siege and the non-combatants died of starvation. On the 22nd of Hyperbereteos, shortly before, stand 3 soldiers of the 15th Legion crept up to the tower that projected opposite them and noiselessly undermined it. In the darkness, the sentries on its battlements failed to observe them either during or after their arrival. Working in silence, the soldiers rolled away the 5 stones forming the base. As they jumped out of the way, the tower fell with a resounding crash, bringing the sentries down with it. The other sentry groups fled in panic. Many made a bold effort to break through, but were cut down by the Romans. Among them, Joseph, who was killed by a chance shot as he tried to escape through the gap in the wall. Bewildered by the crash, the whole population lost their heads and ran in all directions as if the entire Roman army had broken in. At that moment, chairs confined to bed and in the doctor's hands expired, his death caused by terror as much as by his illness. The Romans, however, mindful of their earlier failure, made no attempt to force their way in till on the 23rd of the month Titus returned, and furious at the blow that had fallen on the Romans, in his absence chose 200 cavalry and some infantry and noiselessly entered the town. Discovering this, when he was already inside, the sentry groups gave the alarm and rushed to their posts. In a moment, news of the Roman entry reached the center of the town. Some snatched their children and, dragging their wives with them, fled to the citadel. Wailing and shouting, others went to meet Titus and were, without exception, killed. Many were prevented from running up to the heights, and in their helplessness fell into the hands of the Roman guards. There were heart-rending cries as men were slaughtered on every side, and the whole town was deluged with the blood that poured down the slopes. To deal with those who had retired to the citadel, Vespasian came in person at the head of his entire force. The hilltop was rocky and inaccessible, on every side soaring to an immense height, ringed with precipices and thick with people all around. There the Jews inflicted heavy casualties on their attackers, rolling down rocks and hurling missiles of every kind, while they themselves on their lofty perch were almost out of reach. But to ensure their destruction, they were struck full in the face by a miraculous tempest, which carried the Roman shafts up to them, but checked and turned aside their own. So violent was the blast that they could neither keep their feet on the narrow ledges, having no proper foothold, nor see the approaching enemy. Up came the Romans and hemmed them in. Whether they resisted or tried to surrender, their fate was the same. For the Romans boiled with rage against them all. When they remembered those who perished in the first onslaught, despairing of escape and hemmed in every way, they flung their wives and children and themselves, too, into the immensely deep artificial ravine that yawned under the citadel. In fact, the fury of the visitors seemed less destructive than the suicidal frenzy of the trapped men. 4,000 fell by Roman sword, but those who plunged to destruction proved to be over 5,000. The sole survivors were 2 women, nieces of Philip, son of Josephus, a man of note who had commanded King Agrippa's army. They survived because when the town fell, they eluded the fury of the Romans, who spared then not even babes in arms, but seized all they found and slung them from the citadel. Thus Gamala fell on the 23rd of Hyperbereteos, the revolt having begun on the 24th of Gorpiaios. Okay, there we go. We made it to the end of the chapter. Great. Next time I go live, we will be taking on factions in Jerusalem. Okay, so this is going to get into inter-Jerusalem politics, which is going to be interesting. Because we're probably going to be some sort of 12 tribes situation probably baked in the cake here, and we may see proto version of political parties like the Likud party, which is run with Benjamin Netanyahu in the current powers of Israel. So, with all of this being said, once again, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Pasta, for coming through and tuning in tonight. And yeah, I will. I'll catch you guys. I'll catch you guys in a bit. That's all I got.